Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. We're glad you all can make it, especially on Father's Day. We know it's not the easiest day to be here. We appreciate you coming. Tonight, we have as our special guest speaker, Tracie Austin. This is her new book, Alien Encounters in the Western United States. She's also has her own TV show called Let's Talk Paranormal. And she came to us from Las Vegas today. We're glad to have her. And here is Tracie Austin. Just speak directly into it.
I will. Let me just move my stuff here. Oh, I feel like Oprah with all these bright lights. And of course I'm a Brit. So I'll try and speak as clearly as I can, because I know some of my wording and my lingo may be a little different, but I almost didn't make it here because I was developing strep throat a couple of days ago, but luckily I managed to get rid of it in time to be here. So I do want to thank Pete and Barbara for being such gracious hosts and flying me in here to be this month's speaker. And I'm delighted to be here, and thank you to you folks also on this special day of Father's Day, making a very big effort to come out and support the event tonight. I appreciate that. And I want to start off by telling you how my journey into this whole UFO phenomena began, because I did not set out to be part of this subject whatsoever. And I actually trained as a musician, and I was a concert pianist in London, and I was studying at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama back in 1987, when I had my very first encounter of seeing a craft. Didn't see any beings at the time, but I had my first sighting of a craft. And I'm right there in the middle of London, the Barbican. And for those of you that are familiar, that have been to London, the Barbican is right there in the middle of London. It's on the Circle Line. And it's a very busy place. People say if you like London, you'll like New York. It's very, very similar. It's very, very busy. And I was just there with my best friend at the time, who was also a musician. He was a guitarist. And we were having a conversation, just having a general conversation and looking out the windows of the YMCA where we were staying as students at the time. And something catches my eye through the windows. There's a whole block of windows, about 9 windows. And I see this object in the sky. And I haven't a clue what I'm looking at. I just know that it's not a conventional aircraft. And it's a crystal clear blue sky day, and which is very unusual for London. For those of you that have been to England, we get rain all the time. But this day was a great clear day. And I see this cone-shaped object in the sky. And I'm watching it, and I turn to my friend and I say, "What the bloody hell is that?" As you do, you know. And he turns to the window and he looks outside and he said, "Oh my God, it's a UFO." And I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean, UFO?" So he explains to me the meaning of a UFO, and I said, "Okay, so you're meaning then that this craft is being piloted then by beings from somewhere else, you know, in the cosmos or interplanetary or interdimensional?" He said, "Yeah, exactly." And I thought, "Oh, okay." So I stood watching it, and this object was rotating as it was moving across the sky. Moving fairly slowly. It wasn't at great speed, but you could tell it was moving. And it was rotating, pointed part at the top and the rounded bit at the bottom. And I could tell that it was metallic because of the way that the light was hitting the craft as it was moving round. You could see the glint of light hitting it. And we watched it move across the London sky and out of view. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's like, oh, I wasn't scared. It didn't terrify me. I was just curious as to what this thing was, because I'd never seen anything like it before. It was almost like a semi-transparent grey. You could almost see through it, but you couldn't. And like I said, the only way I knew it was metallic because of the way the light was hitting it and shining on it. So we watched it go out of view. And of course, the whole evening then, the rest of the day and the night, I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I was telling everybody that I came into contact with what we'd seen that day. We were just blown away with it. So the very next day, we go somewhere. I can't remember where we were going, but we went onto the tube train. And we come out of the tube station, and there's a guy selling newspapers at the entrance of the newspaper stand there. And my friend points to the newspaper and says, "Oh, look, there's our UFO sighting." Now, there wasn't as far as I remember, this was in 1987, by the way. I don't remember a photograph being on the front of the paper, but it was the Evening Standard newspaper. And that was the local paper for the City of London. But there was big letters, UFO seen in the City of London. So, lo and behold, other people had seen this object, thank God. So from that point onwards, that's what got my attention. And it's as if this thing had said to me, you're not going to go down this road that you think you're going to go down as a musician. You're going to go down this road, and you're going to find out what we're all about and what we do. So from then on, I was absolutely hooked. And I attended most conferences I could find on the subject across the country. Also came out here to the Laughlin UFO conference that happens in my hometown now of Las Vegas. Well, actually, it moved to Arizona, but it's going to be revived again in Laughlin this year, in November. So yeah, I bought as many books as I could find. I read up on the subject as much as possible and tried to learn all I could. So what happened was, as that was my initial sighting, more and more things started to happen. Started to have dreams of UFOs, which I couldn't understand why I was having dreams of UFOs. It was, I wasn't particularly into the subject because my life as a musician was very, very intense. It was, 7 hours a day practicing with a piece of wood, an instrument. So I didn't really have time to have anything else on my mind, to be honest with you, but it all changed from that day, big time. So from there, what happened was, I then, within about 3 years after that, I moved back to my hometown of Staffordshire. And the sightings continued. And again, one particular day, it was a Tuesday, and I used to teach my instrument. When I went back to Staffordshire, I opened up a teaching agency for, to teach the modern day instruments, saxophone, drum kit, singing, keyboard, that kind of thing, to assist kids in schools that wanted to learn modern day instruments. So my best friend and I opened up a teaching organization, and we put teachers into schools across the country. And I taught privately as well, and this particular day I was waiting for some students to come to my house. And I got some time before the student arrived, so what I decided to do was to go to one of the local woods, which was called Hanchurch Woods, and read a book. And stop off at the local store and get some snacks to take with me. So I get in my car and I go down the street and I pull onto the car park. And as you know that we drive on the wrong side of the road, right? The wrong side of the road and the wrong side of the car. So anyway, I pull onto the car park, and as I'm getting out the right-hand side of my vehicle, something tells me to look up. And I look up, and what I see is a black boomerang object that is moving in an anti-clockwise motion. And I shut my door, and I'm just standing looking at this thing, and I'm watching it go round and round and round, totally silent, black, and it's this boomerang shape. And as I'm watching it, what it starts to do is morph itself into a black sphere, a black ball. And the black ball keeps going round, Then it starts to grow back into the boomerang shape, and then right from the middle of it, it grows an appendage right in the middle that made it look like an arrowhead. So I thought, I got to grab somebody here. I can't, I'm witnessing something that isn't, it isn't normal. I need to grab somebody. So a lady pulled up by the side of my car, and she's getting her child out of the back seat, and I go over to her and I say, "Excuse me, I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but can you see this object up here in the sky?" And she looked up, holding her child on her hip, and she looks up and she says, "Yeah, you mean that black thing?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Yeah, I can see it." I said, "Well, what do you think it is?" And she says, I don't know, but I don't think it's from here," is what she said to me, which I thought was a little odd. So I thought, okay, well, let me see who else I can grab. So I ran across the car park again to one of the guys that owned one of the restaurants over there. And same thing, "Sir, I hope you don't think I'm being crazy, but can you see what I'm seeing here in the sky?" And he looked and he said, "Yes, I can." I said, "Well, what do you think it is?" He said, "I think that's a hang glider." I said, "A hang glider? Where is the person hanging from this? There's no human being hanging from this thing." And I don't know what the laws are in America, but in England it's certainly against the law to hang glide in an upbuilt area, certainly so low like that. It's against the law. You can't do it. And it didn't really, make any sense the way this thing was changing shape either. So I said, "No, that's not a hang glider. That's not a hang glider." He said, "It's not?" I said, "No, it's not." So it looked like it was moving off towards where I was going to go, Hanchurch Woods. So I got in my car, never bothered to get the snacks, got in my car and went over to Hanchurch Woods and waited for this thing to come over. And I wait there about 30, 40 minutes waiting for this thing, and I'm hanging out the car and I'm looking up, and people walking their dogs thinking, "What is this crazy woman doing?" But it never came over. So I went back to my house and waited for my student, and within about 20, 25 minutes of my student arriving, something told me to go to the window in my living room. I went to the window. This thing flew over the rooftop of my house. It went over the rooftop of the home across the street. It stopped dead, and it did the same thing it did before, anti-clockwise motion, this boomerang shape, then went back down into the sphere, the black sphere, then back up into the boomerang and back into the arrowhead. So it started to move off slowly. By the time my student arrived with the parents, I just told the parent what I'd just seen. I said, "So if you go down the street and, when they drop the child off, if you go down the street on your way home, you might still see it." So anyway, she came to pick up her child later on. She never saw the object. So I reported it to one of the local groups in my area. And they said, "Well, what we'll do, we'll check with the Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, and we'll find out if they were able to track anything on their radar. So leave it with us and we'll see." Well, on that Saturday, I got a call from the local group. And they said to me, "Tracie, we did check with the Civil Aviation Authority, and they didn't track a thing on radar. Not to say that, there wasn't an object there, but because you were seeing it. But there were no balloons, there were no hang gliders, there was nothing in the area at that time. But whatever this thing was, it was not tracked on radar. But I do want to tell you this," he said to me. He said, "Yesterday, which was the Friday, 3 days after my sighting, a guy calls our hotline and says, 'I don't want to leave my name. I am not at all interested in UFOs, but I just want to tell you what I've seen today. And what I've seen is 3 black boomerang objects flying in formation over my house.' And this man lived about 9-10 miles from where I lived. So it wasn't that far away at all. So that was confirmation to me that what I'd seen was very real. There was something going on in the area. I don't think it's any coincidence either that a month later I was organizing my first UFO conference in my area. That was in 1996 at a local museum. And I decided I wanted to do the conference to bring awareness to the subject, to find out if other people were seeing things out there, what other people's beliefs were, and bring attention to it. And we managed to fill a theatre, quite similar to this actually, a museum theatre of 250 people. So we did a really, really great job. And so I think it was no coincidence that that craft showed up at that time, actually. And, you know, the media were involved. I was then on radio shows talking about this and talking about the conference. And then still kept seeing things in the skies in England, typically daylight sightings of silver spheres and different shaped craft. And then I meet my husband, who's now my ex-husband, in England, and at a UFO conference, actually, and in 2001, and come over to, we get married and we come over to live in California. And what we do is we decide that we're going to take a trip to the Grand Canyon. And what we have on screen here is the trip to the Grand Canyon. And this was in June, I think around about June the 19th of 2001, if I'm not mistaken. And we go to the Grand Canyon. I'd never been to the Grand Canyon, so I decide what I'm going to do, because it's such a magnificent sight on the outer rim, that I'm going to take 3 panoramic snapshots of the Grand Canyon, so I can put the 3 photographs together to create the panoramic view. So I do that, and it takes a day or so for the photographs to be developed, and we get the photographs back. So I'm flicking through the photographs, looking through them, and I discover this. And I said, oh my God, we have a UFO on our photograph here. Couldn't see it with the naked eye when we were there. This thing must have been traveling so fast that the shutter speed caught it, but our eyes didn't catch it. So that was the original photograph. We took it back straight away to the guy that developed it, because we knew once we started to show this to people, they would say, oh, you know, that might be a glitch on the camera lens, or it might be this, or it might be that, but we knew that it wasn't. So we took it back, and he marked it with the red pen that you can see, and he said no, and he looked on the negative and said, no, it's actually in the photograph, and it is a solid metallic object. So what I did, and I hope I'm going to do this correctly, I decided to blow it up. And I think I do this. Do I do this, Barbara? Thank you. Thank you, hon. So I blow it up a little bit bigger. And you can see on the I don't know whether it was the front or the back end of it, but it was distorted, like it was something to do with the propulsion. And it was distorting it. And I was at a conference one time, and I showed it to Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist who's, you probably know Stanton, he's heavily involved in the UFO phenomena, a very nice guy, great at what he does. And he said, yeah, I have a photograph very similar to that, which also has distortion on the disc. And I blew it up even more so you could see it. And we were just intrigued that, you know, wow, we'd caught something here on this photograph. So that was June, like I said, 2001. Fast forward to November the 13th of 2001, and I used to live out in California, actually. I lived here for about 6 years. I lived in Canyon Country, I lived in Agora Hills, Santa Clarita, and Studio City. And at the time, we had just come from a friend's apartment, my husband and I at the time. And we're in the car, and I remember wanting to go back home to watch the Crossing Over with John Edward, the psychic medium. It was a new show called Crossing Over, wanted to go home to see it. And so we're at the traffic lights and we're waiting for the traffic lights to change. And it seemed to take forever for these traffic lights to change. And my husband noticed, well, there were two lights in the sky. On Radford Street, where CBS Studios is. Are you all familiar with Radford Street? Studio City? Yeah. You've got CBS Studios, you've got a gas station, you've got the bank building, and then you've got McDonald's just across the street. Well, that's where the traffic lights were. And my husband says, this was like 6:45 p.m. at night. It wasn't, although it was going into the fall, winter nights, it wasn't too dark, but it was, you know, dark enough. So he said, oh my God, look at that plane. It looks like it's going to fall from the sky. It's going way too low and too slow. So I bend down and I look through the windscreen and I said, oh my God, you're right. And I thought, any minute now we are going to see a huge disaster here in Studio City because this plane is going too slow and too low. Something's going to happen. Well, 2 lights became 3. And I immediately said, this isn't a plane. We've got to pull onto the gas station here and wait for this thing to come over. So we pulled onto the gas station, we waited for this thing to come over, and oh my goodness, we got the shock of our lives. This thing was approximately 200 feet above our car. And it was no longer 3 lights. It was a solid nuts and bolts object. And what it was a diamond-shaped craft. And it was triangular at the front, and it was boat-tailed at the back. So it was like an elongated diamond shape. And it had a piping, I'm calling it piping, but I don't think it is piping, but it was like a framework that went around the outside of the object. So you could see the sky from in between that framework to the craft. And we rolled down the windows on our vehicle, and we were literally hanging out the car like this, looking up at the understructure of the craft. It was right over us. And what we could see underneath was a V formation of cold white lights. And this thing was totally, totally silent. And we got our hands on the door handle, ready to go out and stand underneath this thing. We were going to do it. You know, we were going to do a Scully and Mulder and stand underneath this thing and, yeah, beam us up. We want to go on board. We didn't have time to do that because this thing literally stayed for about 8 seconds. And then it did the most amazing turn ever. And it didn't bank like an aircraft. It's the only way I can describe it is like melting butter in a pan, you know, and you tip the pan and it just glides. It was like that. Steven Spielberg would even have a hard time recreating this, I'm sure. And it went off over CBS Studios. And I said to my husband, quick, we got to follow this thing. So we switch on the engine and we try to follow this object. And again, we're up against red lights the whole time. And we lose it over the LA River. We totally lost it. So I said, well, we need to turn back and go back to the guard shack because somebody must have seen something there. This thing was huge. So we turn back and I go into the guard shack and I knock on the door and I say, you know, excuse me, hope you don't think I'm being crazy, but have you just seen a very strange object fly over your building? And it's a female guard and she says, a strange object. And I thought, oh no, I got to say it. So I said, well, yeah, my husband and I just had a UFO sighting right there on the corner of Radford Street, and we saw this thing fly off over your building. And it was way over the top of your building. We saw it. So she said, oh my God, come and draw this thing for me. So she shoved a pen and a piece of paper in my hand, and I'm drawing this thing. And she's pointing out the fact that they would not be able to see this object because the windows are anti-reflective in that guard shack. They can only see themselves. Plus, the CBS Studios is full of trees on their property, so you can't see anything other than trees. And of course, we're creating such a commotion about the sighting we've just had that 2 other guards come up and ask what all the commotion's about. And we then went on to say, well, we just had this UFO sighting over our car, less than 200 feet. And, you know, we wanted to ask you guys if you'd seen it because it was clear as anything. And he said, he stopped and he said to me, you know, I do believe you. I used to be a pilot in Missouri, and we used to play a game of cat and mouse with some of these objects. He says it wasn't quite a diamond-shaped object like you saw, but these were huge balls of orange light, huge. And they'd go over the mountain ranges, they'd come around, they'd stop, they'd wait for us to go over the mountains, come around, catch up with us, they'd go over, and we'd be doing this the whole time. It's just a game of cat and mouse the whole time. He said, so, you know, that was the experience that he'd had. So anyway, we then go home, totally missed John Edward. So never saw the John Edward show. And I said to my husband, you go in this room, I'll go in this room, and let's draw the object separately so we can see what we saw independently. So we do that, and as I'm doing that, I have this feeling that this thing communicated with me. And I do have intuitive tendencies, and I have done since I was 3 years old. And I got a feeling that this thing had communicated with me, and that it was a male that had communicated with me. And I'd felt that it wasn't human, but it was like it was human. And it had told me that we don't mean any harm, we are just looking, and there's 3 of us on board, and we are from the star system, the Pleiades. So what do you do with that information? It came all of a sudden as I'm drawing the craft. So my husband and I matched the crafts together. They were identical. I told him what the message was I'd got. Couldn't really do anything with it. But we decided to report the sighting to Newfork, which is Peter Davenport's, the National UFO Reporting Center in Washington. So we went online, we reported the object, the sighting of the object. And I don't think there were any other sightings at that time, which I was very, very surprised. Anyway, a year later, still living in Studio City, there was a newspaper and a magazine stand in Studio City. So I go to purchase a UFO magazine. And I'm picking up the magazine, and I'm giving the guy my money. And he looks at the magazine title, and he looks at me, and he looks back at the magazine, as if to say, really? Because you don't look like you'd be interested in UFOs. You don't look like you'd be somebody interested in UFOs. I don't know what somebody looks like who's interested in UFOs, but that's the impression I got for him. And I suddenly said, yes, I had a sighting over that bank building there just 12 months ago. And this was a diamond-shaped object. And it was right there over that bank building. I'm trying to tell him this, and he said, you know, I heard something about that object. I heard that there was a sighting, and it was a black diamond-shaped object. I thought, this is great. You know, 12 months later, I'm getting some kind of validation that we weren't the only people that saw this. And if you know Studio City, I mean, Studio City is a very busy street, you know, unlike any other city. Apart from New York, I guess. But everybody's coming from work, and it's just busy, 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 busy. Someone had to have seen it. We can't be the only 2 people. And then a few months later, a friend of mine, her husband has heard on a radio show something about this craft that was seen. And someone else had also seen this black diamond-shaped object also. So we now have 2 other witnesses that saw this, so it validated it, which was awesome. Anyway, I'm going to fast forward to... Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, a year later, to the same month, November, I decide to create Let's Talk Paranormal, which is a TV talk show on the paranormal subject, which includes UFOs. And I actually... Who's heard of Preston Dennett in here? Yeah, very good friend of mine, great guy, great researcher, love his work. And his sister-in-law is an artist named Kasara. She did the artwork in my book. Anyway, I hadn't written the books at the time, but I invited her on the TV show because she works very, very with abductees. And she has this really unique ability to tune in to these beings that abductees are reported to have seen. So I invite her on the show. And we're discussing the different beings that people are seeing. And I put her on the spot. I test her towards the end of the show. And I said, well, I was in Studio City a year ago to this week. And I had this sighting. And this is what the craft is I saw. But I'd like you to draw for me what you think was on board that craft. And lo and behold, on that show, she actually drew 3 beings, which is what I was told was on that ship. One was a male, one was a female, and the other was a 7-foot being, like a grey, but not quite like a grey, and was wearing a cloak. She even drew right down to the fine detail of the little badge things. I don't think they were badges, but there's something that they wore on their flight suits. And these were blonde-haired, blue-eyed beings. And as I'm sure you are aware, you know, a lot of the reported sightings we have of Pleiadians are of, you know, blonde-haired, beautiful-looking beings. So for me, it was total validation. For me, she totally, you know, nailed it. So Let's Talk Paranormal went on for about 4 years, had many guests on the show, and one of the great guests we had was Barbara Lamb, which I think I see here in the audience. Nice to see you, Barbara. And we did a couple of shows with Barbara about alien abduction and the cases that Barbara had investigated, and many others, and you know, we'd won awards for the show as well. Then I moved to Las Vegas, and I decided to take a backseat from the TV show for a while and write a couple of books. So one of the books I actually wrote was Welcome to Haunted Las Vegas, Nevada, which is about hauntings in Las Vegas, not hotel hauntings. That had already been done. I wanted to do something a little bit different, so I worked with a paranormal investigations team to, you know, find out what was going on in residential hauntings. And Vegas is extremely haunted, I can tell you. And all over. And even out there, I was still having sightings out in Las Vegas. Typically, though, the sightings I've had in Las Vegas have been silver spheres. And I was going up the 95 one time. My husband was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and we were having a discussion about something or the other. And it was quite a heated, debated discussion. And I put my arm on the door and put my face on my hand. And I looked up as I was doing it, and a UFO is flying along the 95 as we're coming up this way. It's coming this way in the opposite direction, and goes into a cloud. Couldn't pull over, but I, you know, say to my husband at the time, oh my God, I just saw a UFO coming up. I don't live that far from Indian Springs, to be honest, so I don't know whether it was coming from that area. I don't think Area 51 is quite where I'm at. It's further out. But certainly the Nellis test site is very close to where I'm at, and that Indian Springs as well. So that one I typically saw, and then I'd also seen on Tropicana very early one morning 4 of these silver spheres. 3 of them were in a row, and they were above the traffic lights, and 1 was below here. So I got 3 in a row, and then 1 was here. Something was coming out of this one below. Something dark was coming from it, but it was morphing. Couldn't quite catch exactly what it was. It was fairly high up, but not high enough that I, you know, couldn't see the craft. I could see the objects very clearly, but couldn't make out what this black object was. Then the lights changed, and of course we had to move on. So still having sightings to this day, and decided that I'm going to write a book. And there's my dear friend, Dr. Roger Lear, who, if it wasn't for his participation with my book, Alien Encounters in the Western United States, that book would not be what it is, because that man assisted me with cases of alien implant removal. And is everybody familiar with Dr. Lear? Dr. Roger Lear? Yeah. And very, very sadly, we lost Dr. Roger Lear in March of this year, very unexpectedly and way too soon. Great pioneer in his work of alien implant removal. And the last I heard of this, that Roger was going to remove the 17th suspected alien implant. And he was very gracious. He allowed me photographs of alien implants in the book, and spoke to me on a private level about some of the cases that he was involved with the alien implant removal, one of which I was present for, by the way. He allowed me to be present back in 2002, 2003. And I will tell you the story of this real quick. This was an airline stewardess, and she had, with her boyfriend back then, 20-something years ago, had a sighting. I can't quite remember where they were at. I think they may have been out somewhere in California. They were in a motel room, and something tells them to go to the window. And they go to the window, not knowing why they're going to the window, and they see a disc outside with the flashing lights going around it. And they're watching this disc, and the next thing they know, a ball of blue light comes into the motel room. Then it's morning, and they haven't got a clue how they go from seeing the disc to the blue light coming in to them then realizing it's morning. So she says, they start this conversation, morning conversation, just usual, pouring coffee and things like that, and says, wait a second, do you remember what happened to us last night? And he looked at her boyfriend, and she said, remember, we saw the craft outside the window, the disc. And then we see this ball of blue light that comes into the room. And then what happened to us? What happened? Well, he didn't want to talk about it. He did not want to talk about it. In fact, she said that was the very last time I ever saw him again. So that was the end of the relationship. So she is in the shower later that morning, and showering away, and notices in her right forearm a lump. And she thinks, wow, that's a little odd. I don't remember that being in my arm before. But doesn't think anything of it, and keeps it in her arm for 20-something years. She sees Dr. Roger Lear on a TV documentary, and she's watching the program of him talk to abductees and removing alien implants. So she puts two and two together, and she thinks, I wonder if this is what I have in my arm, because I remember seeing that craft 20 years ago. Then I mysteriously have this small lump in my arm. So she contacts Dr. Roger Lear. They meet, and they discuss this whole sighting that she had and what the potentiality of this thing in her arm being. So, as Dr. Lear used to do, he used to put all of his clients through, psychology testing, pre and post surgery. Obviously, she passed it flying colors. She's an airline stewardess, and sane lady. I'd met her personally. As far as I could see, a credible person. And he said, well, let's do some testing on it. So they did some testing. And he said, well, whatever this thing is, it's not a cyst. It is not attached to tissue. The mere fact that she could actually move this lump around her arm, she could push it around her arm. So he said, it's not a cyst. So what do you want to do? Do you want to keep it in, or do you want it removed? And she said, no, I don't want to keep it in. I do want it removed. So the day came when Dr. Roger Lear and another surgeon performed the surgery. My husband at the time filmed it, and I was just there just for, moral support and to see this thing. So the surgeons go into her forearm, and as they are picking up the skin with the forceps, this thing shoots up her arm. Like, no, you're not going to get me. It's got a mind of, no, you're not going to get me out of here. This is where I belong, So they cut her skin open further and really lift it up like a tent now and go in with the forceps and pull this thing out. And Roger had said to me, every abductee typically says the same thing when these things are removed, that they feel a whole new sense of freedom once these things are removed. And hers actually was very different from the others that Dr. Lear had removed at the time, because all the others had come from the left side of the body on his patients. Hers was on the right side of the body, and this was not metallic like the others had been on the left side of everyone else's body either. This was in two halves. It's like a little clam. And it was creamish white in color, and it had a black strip that run down the middle of this thing. And so he, put it in her body fluid in a vial and kept it refrigerated for about 24 to 48 hours. He does this with all of the implants to see what the status is, any change in the object and so forth. And I don't know what happened to that particular implant. I know that Roger used to keep all of those implants for his own research. An organization he had called A&S Research, which he keeps these for his own study. And it was the weirdest thing ever, and totally different, like I said, from the others that had been removed. And it was just a very odd thing. But thankfully, I got to see it with my own eyes. So that was me with Roger there back in 2005, where I was mistress of ceremonies at the MUFON symposium in Denver, Colorado. I'm going to see if I can move this up here. And I know Barbara did show me how to do this earlier, and I have forgotten how to do it. I think I have to do this.
Yes, you got it.
I got it, yay! Thank you. There's Roger and I talking on my TV show. It's a little bit pixelated, I do apologize. Talking about the Varginha case, where there were live ETs that were captured there in 1996 when a craft came. Who's heard of the Varginha case, by the way? Yeah, Brazil, yeah. Live ETs that were found roaming around. This cylindrical object had been picked up by NORAD, who called the Brazilian defense and said, you have an object coming down. You have an unknown object coming down in the vicinity of Varginha. And it looked like this thing had, like it had been shot at or whatever, because there was a huge piece apparently missing from the back end of it, and it was in trouble. It was coming down. And a farmer had seen it, and the military came in rather quickly to take over the whole scenario. And there were live beings everywhere. They weren't quite like grays, they were actually brown in color. They had 3 bumps on the head. 3 schoolgirls coming from school said that they looked like the devil. It had red eyes and these 3 bumps on the head, brown in color. So this was when Roger came onto the show to talk about that particular case. And then this one was when Roger, the first show that we did, Roger came onto the show to talk about alien implants, which won us an award for the show. So he came on there to talk about alien implants and the removal of them. And then alien encounters in the western United States, which Barbara Lamb so kindly wrote the foreword to the book for me. And that very front cover there is actually a case that I had researched in England back in the 90s. And The chapter in the book, I name her Roxanne. It's not her real name, but I name her Roxanne, and it's a British case where Roxanne would, she lived in Hanchurch Woods, where I said I was going to go to read the book that day, and that boomerang object was coming over. She lived out in Hanchurch Woods there. She was in her, I think, mid-20s. And somewhat, how can I say this without sounding? I've got to choose my words very carefully. She was in a relationship, but, in and out of jobs, in and out of relationships, couldn't quite find her footing in life, was still trying to find her way, and she would have these things happen to her. And she'd heard about a conference that I was doing. I don't think it was the 1996 one. I think it was the 1998 conference in England. And she came up to me and she said to me that she had these experiences and that she'd seen craft. But she'd been an abductee. And so we met, and she went through the whole story of how this all happened, that she would see these craft, and that she had gone to a dentist's office and saw something very unusual on an X-ray in her jaw. And the doctor was clueless, didn't know what this thing was, and asked her had she fallen on something and lodged something in her jaw, to which she said no, she hadn't. Well, she saw the X-ray, but they wouldn't let her have the X-ray. And she said this thing was long. It was about, I think that's probably about, half an inch? About half an inch long, kind of like a pencil lead, a little bit thicker than a pencil lead, but it was up-lodged in her jaw. And when these beings were going to visit her, she would hear a ringing in her left ear. This thing, it's like this thing in her jaw was connected some way to her ear, because she would hear these sounds, this ringing sound every time they would come close for her. And she talked to me about this particular scenario where she was taken on board the craft, and typical Greys, as you can see, and they bring her a baby, and they tell her that this is your child. And no, she says, no, this is not my child. And she gets off the table and her hands are up and she's, no, this isn't mine. And she's backing off as she's saying, don't bring this near me. I don't want anything to do with this. She was petrified of this thing. It was not a human child. I think Casada tried, she did a great job of the whole drawing of it. But you can see it's not a human baby there. But anyway, so that was the story of the front cover of that. And what I typically find with some of the cases in the book, I have a case from Las Vegas, a lady named Dina, who also has had a lifetime of abductions, and right from a young girl was, petrified of the dark, had to go to sleep as a child with the lights on. Even those little things that you plug in the wall, the night lights, had to have those, the curtains had to be shut, the closet doors had to be closed, the drapes had to be closed, and she'd talk about how she would see owls floating outside her bedroom window. Whatever these things were, I don't think they were owls. Owls don't float. And these petrified her. And how she would hate going over to her grandmother's house because her grandmother used to like to collect owls. And it would totally freak her out every time she'd go over, and she'd make up any excuse to not be, going over to grandma's house that day, because she couldn't stand to see them. So owls, I notice, creep up periodically in alien abductions, and I'm sure that, if you get the chance to speak with Barbara Lamb or Yvonne Smith, who's here tonight, owls do play a part. Animals do play a part. Certain animals, owls and deer, as screen memories. And so she had grown up with these experiences, and even her father took her to see a psychiatrist at one point to try and get her to overcome her fear of the dark. And so much so that it took her back to a situation where she remembers being on the ship and wouldn't comply with what they were asking her to do. They were asking her to do something on a screen, some kind of test on a screen, and she didn't want to do it. And they placed her in a tank, a dark tank, and that's where her fear of the dark came, from having placing her in this tank, and would not let her out until she complied that she was going to do this test. And anyway, it goes back and forth up to, I think when in her teenage years, past teenage years, and she goes to have a gynecological exam. And the doctor discovers she's no longer a virgin. And yet she tells me, I've had no sexual relations, I'm not in a relationship. And he's, can't believe that I need to tell your mother this. Her mother's waiting in the waiting room, that your daughter isn't a virgin anymore. So he goes out, has a conversation with the mother. She's trying to tell her mother, no, that's not the case. No, I'm not in a relationship. I don't have a boyfriend. I haven't had sex. I'm not interested in sex. And her mother then, gets annoyed with her, thinking that she's lying, and then puts her on birth control. So she's had a little bit of a hard time trying to come to terms with what's been going on in her life, and comes to later years that, a little bit later on, that what had transpired, she had gone on board the ship at 16 with other girls, other females. And she talked about an incubatorium, and she talked about a wall that was full of baskets of babies. And she said there must have been about 30 baskets of babies in this wall, and there was a dim light that was coming from behind the wall. And it wasn't quite a grey, but some robotic kind of greyish being had made its way through to the girls in this incubatorium. And it said to the girls that what we want you to do is we want you to take every baby out of the basket, and we want you to hold it to your breast, and we want you to feed it. And she looked at it like it was crazy. I haven't given birth to this child. How can I do that? I don't have milk. Can't give this baby anything. And all the other girls are watching, and they're listening, and they're nodding their heads, and they're saying, we can't do this. Well, it just demands to her that do it. So she said, we do it. We comply and we do it. She notices a reptilian being. A lot of reptilian beings creep up, pop up in these abduction scenarios. Didn't say anything to the girls. In fact, stood still most of the time. Had a cape on, and just watched the girls as they're taking the babies out of the baskets, I think just making sure that they were doing what they're supposed to have been doing. And she said, when we did that, Tracie, we took the babies, these lifeless babies, out of these baskets, and pale babies, and we just held them to us, and they just watched as we did it. And then we'd place the babies back in the baskets, and we'd do this till we got through every single baby in the wall. And it's quite an unbelievable story. And she's always had gynecological problems, never had children. She's coming up to 52 and always had problems, could never have children. Even to the point of having an IUD fitted as birth control. And on an abduction, they had no idea what this IUD was. And so they removed it out of the way. And it got lodged, that she had to have it surgically removed. Quite a big operation. And the gynecologist said, I've never seen anything like this. I'm going to write about this in my journal of obstetrics because I've never seen anything like this. So obviously very difficult for her to explain to a gynecologist how the IUD got to where it got. And later, also, this has still gone on for many years, and has implants also, and I think she has about 4. She actually pulled one out of her leg a few months ago, and the thing totally disappeared between her fingers. And yeah, I was like furious. It's like, you never took a photograph of this thing? you know. So she goes, I couldn't. As soon as I got it out, it got 2 prongs on it. And as soon as it came out, it totally disintegrated. So anyway, there's another case in the book here of Chris who had a similar experience in an incubatorium and is sitting in a waiting room, wondering what she's waiting for, doesn't know how she's in this waiting room. And a tall female being comes through that has no hair, totally bald, very tall, and asks Chris to follow her, takes her on a tour of the ship, goes past the manuals of the ship, goes past the window. She says, I see the stars, I see, you know, the galaxy. I'm seeing it all through the window. And then this being leads her through an incubatorium. Same kind of thing. An incubatorium, baskets in the walls. And she's given a baby to hold. And yet this baby, although lifeless to some degree, has human blue eyes, beautiful big blue eyes, as she described it to me. And this being asked her to please hold the baby, you know, please hold the baby. And so she holds the baby, and she remembers the baby's hand actually taking her little finger and grasping her finger with the hand, Chrissy's finger with the hand. Baby's hand. So it was quite emotional for her, and as she was relaying the story to me, she got quite emotional talking about it. But that's a couple of the stories here. Let me see. And some of Kasara's artwork. This is one of the greys that's very typical of implantation. And one of the Nordics, this is also one of the beings that Chris had seen, a Nordic type being, often like referred to like a Fabio-looking kind of E.T. Very benevolent, very gentle, very kind, and you know, the angular jawline. And wow, look at him. The George Clooney of reptilians. Isn't he handsome? He's a handsome brute. Look at him. So, yeah, the reptilians. Now, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that the cigar-shaped objects are typically the craft that the reptilians actually fly. I don't know the truth of it, but I've heard it over and over and over, so I don't know. But this is some of Kasara's artwork. She's an amazing artist. And then we've got a dwarf here who's very much a trickster, a prankster, a jokester, likes to tickle the feet. In fact, I think Kasara had an encounter with this being. I had an encounter as well. Not quite with this kind of being, but he was in a hooded cloak like that. There was 2 by the side of my bed, of which I was conscious for. But they had no faces. They had no faces at all. But this guy here, as you can see, has the folds on the skin. I did have an abduction scenario where I went missing for 4 hours in Florida in the early 90s. And through the regression, I did recall that one of the beings I had seen, which was a gray, there were 5 grays at the time. One was around about 5'5" gray. I know he was taller than the others. Very, very old looking, and had those folds underneath the cheeks like that. But this is a dwarf, popular character. And then we've got a tall white here that is, Charles Hall writes about them in his book, about his job there at Indian Springs. And as his, I think he was a flight control guy out there, and talks about how they're out there in families, that they grow to be about 8 feet tall. They're typically very, very white in color, very much like paper, white paper. And he talked about how the pupil of the eye is actually where ours are black, theirs are white. Theirs are white, and then they've got the blueness of the iris of the eye there. But they're there in families. He talked about their ships being white, and how it would freak a lot of the people out there at the base. And even when there was a situation where the police had to be brought in to investigate something or the other on the base, the police were even scared to go in and investigate it because of these beings that were out there. Paula Harris actually interviewed Charles Hall and has done an extensive interview with Charles Hall. So, you know, I research it because he talks about some very interesting stuff, and there are witnesses at Indian Springs that also did get to see these beings that Charles Hall spoke about, and they are there with their families apparently. So, and I think that might be it, yes. Yeah, we'll do an intermission, okay? All right, folks.
We'll take about 10 minutes. We'll take about 10 minutes, and in about 5 minutes, we'll start the raffle. We got some great prizes, including Paul here, the statue from the movie Paul, and a $50 Amazon card, one of Yvonne's books, which I'm sure she'll gladly sign for you, and some other great things too. So you guys take you a break. We got complimentary coffee, if you would like it, out in the lounge too. Also, afterwards tonight, if you want to meet at Denny's, there's a group meeting at Denny's by the airport, and we got maps out there, and there'll be DVDs available 15 minutes after we end. Great. Great. Amazing. You got some more? You want some more there?
I've got some down here, actually. Good luck and good night, he said. Thanks.
All right, you guys ready on camera?
Oh, the lights are so bright. Okay, so I'd be happy to, if you have any questions, to try and answer them. If anyone has any questions. Yes, sir.
Testing. Who's the question?
Gregory.
Almost sounds like a UFO if you do it right.
It's your implant.
Yeah.
It's having an effect.
Tracie, 2 weeks from now, there's going to be a Bay Area conference on the secret space program. The idea of perhaps alien-provided technology, that some of the UFOs we've seen might be back-engineered craft. Some of them are ours, some of them are theirs. In your own research, have you ever come across any cases or information that might shed light on that topic?
To be honest, no, I haven't. I think probably one of the best people to ask about that would be Carol Rosin, who's a really great researcher who deals with, well, space weaponry. And she may, know of craft that are,
She'll be a speaker.
Awesome. Well, there you go. She's the best person to answer. I haven't done any research on that, so that topic, unfortunately, I cannot answer on. But interesting question. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Tracie, have you had any further or encounters yourself?
I had two, actually, Barbara. One of which, one's quite a long story, actually, but one I had regression for. I'd gone missing for about 4 hours in a motel room in Florida in the early 1990s, and one I was conscious of. The one I was conscious of is when I had come back from London, and my partner and I at the time, which is the same guy that witnessed I'd gone missing for 4 hours, we decided to rent a house together. And this particular time, he used to be into yoga and Indian philosophy and meditations and things like that, and used to get up very, very early in the morning to do yoga, about 5 a.m. And this particular morning, I was still asleep. It was approximately about 6 o'clock in the morning. I was starting to wake up at that time frame. I could tell it was only that time because of the way the sun was coming through the windows. And I noticed, in England, by the way, we don't have closets, we have wardrobes. Right. So as I'm waking up, I see the wardrobes in front of me. And I noticed two little beings at the foot of my bed. And these were not greys. What these were beings that had, how can I describe it? It's like monks' clothing. And they had the pointed hoods, a little bit like the Ku Klux Klan. They had the pointed hoods, Hessian material, brown in color, and no faces. A little bit like the dwarf I showed you of Cassara's drawing, with the hooded. But the way that hood was draped was not how this was. It was fitted and it went up to a point. And I didn't see any faces. And as I'm seeing this, I start to call out for my partner's name to the top of my lungs. I'm shouting his name. And nothing is coming out from the voice box, which is what is typical. And I'm shouting, but nothing's coming. A tiny hand, and I trained as a concert pianist, as I told you. My hands are tiny, but this hand you could fit in my hand. And it came from the side of me, the right-hand side, and it cupped over my mouth, and it pulled me back onto the pillow, and I was out. And it was approximately about 8 o'clock-ish when I came to. But when I did come to, it was like it had been 5 minutes, because it was still on my mind that I'd been shouting my partner's name. So I jumped out of bed, I pulled the sheets back, I ran downstairs, and of course my partner's there in this, meditative state, and I'm going, where the bloody hell? I was calling your name, where the hell were you? I've just seen these two beings by my bed, and I'm going off about this thing, and he's like, whoa, calm down. And we eventually had a discussion later about it, but said he heard nothing. He didn't hear me shouting his name or anything, which I categorically know that I was, with all my force here in my voice box. I was calling his name, but nothing was coming out. So I never had regression on that one to see what happened in that time frame. I always thought I couldn't go under regression. I was explaining to a few of the ladies tonight, and Yvonne, I never thought I could go under. I always felt I would resist it, because I'm an in-control person. I don't like to not be in control. And to be put under and not be in control is something I don't think I could do. So I did try it one time, but I couldn't go under. And then for this other experience where I'd gone missing, I had met up with Nick Redfern, a good friend of mine from the UK, and his wife and her mother, who is a regression therapist, and she regressed me for the missing time I'd had in Florida. And that's an interesting story in itself. Probably too long to go into, but if somebody wants to ask me afterwards, I'd be happy to go into it. Depends if we have more questions. If not, I'll go into it. But
you said that you saw the disc for the first time in England in '87, and then you've had several different encounters with them. Do you have any idea why they pick certain people? Because you mentioned something about them being blonde hair and blue-eyed. Is that why they went after you?
no, I don't think so.
But I mean, it's a logical thing.
I'm actually a
isn't it?
redhead, but don't tell anybody.
I was going to ask you if you ever dyed. That was the color of your hair, but I didn't want to do that. But I mean, you wonder why certain people are either they're attracted to you, or I mean, why do they pick certain people? And because you had said that, I thought, geez, She's the perfect one for them.
That's too funny. No, that wasn't the reason. And I've never had any encounters with Pleiadians other than that time in Studio City where they had to telepathically told me who they were. Mine have been with the Greys that I had regression for, and then those little beings that I was conscious of. I think a lot is to do with it. I think the fact I was a musician. And there's a sensitivity there. There's a fine, I'm finely tuned to certain things. And I've always been intuitive, and I think that also being intuitive attracts those kind of things too. I mean, I've had a ghost sighting too. I mean, it all happened in '87 when I had that first sighting. It wasn't a disc in '87, it was a cone-shaped object that was pointed at the top and rounded at the bottom. The disc that I showed on here, we didn't even see in the photograph. That just was in the photograph when we got the negatives, done. And I was, gobsmacked. It was there. But I think that fact that I'm a musician and been very intuitive most of my life, and then it's developed as I've got older. I was talking to the ladies about seeing this headless ghost in London with 4 people. Like I said, it all seemed to happen in '87, but I think there's a sensitivity. And with these beings, and I think that, Barbara Lamb will testify to this, and also Yvonne, that what these grey beings are doing is they're following lineage. They're following bloodlines. If you've been abducted, your mother's been abducted, and your mother's mother's been abducted. They're interested in genetics. And as Dr. Roger Lear first found out, when he was removing these things, he went into this very skeptical. And as a podiatrist had said, I've removed everything from the human body. I've removed glass, paper, hair, plastic, you name it. And when he was presented with the first 2 cases, said that, this is something very logical. Until he went in and removed them and found out that 2 people remotely distant from each other, not knowing each other, had the same object in the body that was meteoric iron. So it was a piece of meteor that has deep space radio waves, highly magnetic, and has nanotechnology. And there's no portal of entry into how these things get into the body. So, this is the fascination with what are these things. And he thought at first, are they tracking devices? But came to find out that no, these aren't tracking devices. These are monitoring your DNA. These beings are interested in a certain characteristic of your DNA. And if you don't have it, they're not interested. And we typically learn, certain blood types too. I think rhesus negative is one that they particularly like because it's a universal blood type for their hybridized program that they're doing. Not to say that, A positives or AB positives haven't been abducted. Of course they have, and my research in my book suggests that yes, many different types of blood groups have, but there seems to be an underlying factor that there's a higher percentage of more of the negative, rhesus negative blood type. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just curious if you have any family members that have fessed up.
If I have any family members that are fessed up? That's a very interesting question. I've spent most of my life I'm like the odd one out of my family, completely the odd one out. Tried to get my parents to understand this whole phenomena that I've been involved with, because my parents backed me as a musician. My life was to be a concert pianist. So they paid for all of that education. And suddenly these show up and I'm no longer going to be doing this, I'm doing this. It's like, oh my gosh, how do I, But they've come around to it better as the years have gone by. I have one sibling that I always have felt has had encounters, but she is not as open as I am. And I tell you one very interesting story one time. while I was still living out in Las Vegas, where I am now. This was a few years ago. This was about 4 or 5 years ago. My sister lived with my parents at the time, and she has a cat. And so while my sister was at work, my dad thought it would be a great idea to send her a text of a picture of the cat. So he takes a photograph of the cat and he texts it to her. She immediately sends a text back to my dad and says, "Why did you send me a photograph of an alien?" Yeah. And so I was the last person to hear about this. And I'm into what I'm into and do what I do, and I'm the last person to hear about it. So I said, oh my God. So I'm saying, okay, my dad says, well, there has to be an explanation. I mean, you know, maybe something happened where the ears got cut off? Or how can the ears be cut off? You know, this thing has the whiskers, and how does a cat become an alien? It was very, very odd, and he tried to explain it away, God bless him, as much as he could, but there was no getting around it. And my sister was adamant it was a picture of an alien, it was a photograph of an alien, and it was it was a grey. And I said, when eventually, they're in England. We have to Skype. Every couple of Sundays in the month we Skype. So I had her draw for me on Skype what she saw, and she drew the typical grey alien head. You know, the big head, the black eyes, the slit for the mouth, and the 2 little holes for the nose. Nothing like a cat.
Where's the picture?
Thank you. I said, where is the picture? I want to see the picture. My dad said, oh, we deleted it.
That's right.
We deleted it. See, and this is what typically happens. They, you know, have this way. And I think, was it you, Pete, that was telling me about how they have mind control once you have... No, it was another gentleman here tonight, wasn't Pete? It was another gentleman I was talking to who said that he had an implant in his nasal cavity. And it came out, and he got a good look at this thing, and I said, don't tell me you trashed it. And he said, yes, I did, because he got the message in his mind that you don't need that. And he threw it. So the same thing, I think, happened with my dad, that this mind thing, and the same with my sister. Delete it. So I went ballistic. I really did, because I wanted to see it, you know. But yeah, my sister validated it. That, yeah, it wasn't a cat, it was a grey. So I thought that was a little odd. But she's never come forward with anything, and I do feel she's had experiences there. Yeah. And I don't know what blood type I am, actually, because I have a phobia with needles. Yeah, and when I first came to the country, I had to have, you know, going through immigration, the needle in the arm and the blood taken, and I'm even telling the guy what needle to use so that I wouldn't feel the pain. Oh, you need to use a butterfly needle. And I'm stamping my feet, and I'm perspiring, and I'm stamping my feet, and I'm sliding down the chair, and I'm telling him to please hurry up, please hurry up, please hurry up. And, you know, I get through it, and he says, you know, you did really great. There's most men that faint on the floor here when I take blood. So I don't even know what blood type I am. But I can tell you that those experiences that I've had, and I've only, like I said, one I remember consciously, the second one I had regression for. If there's others, I don't know. But I know those happened, for sure.
One thing that totally puzzles me are these sightings. At the last Zero meeting, a gal came up and gave a little talk about driving down Olympic Boulevard and watching a UFO. Now, in a town of 10 million people, why was she the only one that saw that UFO? You were in London, you saw this UFO, and you likened it to New York. You know, you see the movie where one guy says, wow, look at that, and then pretty soon the whole town's saying, gee, yeah, what is that? Why is it generally just a very few people that see these things?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't have the answer for that. I think, again, it goes back to the question the lady asked me, sitting next to you, you know, why do some people see them and others don't? I think some people are just more open. open-minded to it. And like I said, if you've been taken, your mother's been taken, and your mother's been taken. It's working as a family lineage.
But you know, you got a million people, and one person sees it. Is
Yep.
that one person right, or is it not?
Well, I see where you're going with it. I see where you're going with that. Yeah, no, I understand. It's a very strange phenomena, and it's one that I think it's almost as if it plays games with you. We know that from the sighting I'd had in London with my best friend, that we were not the only two people. There were other people in the City of London that do see it. The thing is, with the majority of people I find, they're not looking up. People are in their heads a lot of the time. They're looking down. They're thinking about the monthly bills they've got to pay. They're thinking about picking up the kids from school, what they're going to cook for dinner that night. Their head is consumed with stuff. So a lot of the people, a lot of the time, aren't even looking up. So they're there. I think they are there. I think more people have got to keep looking up. And of course, there's that thing where they have this cloaking device that Bud Hopkins used to speak a lot about too, where they can cloak themselves. There's the case he wrote about the Brooklyn Bridge abductions of 1989, where a World United Nations leader and 2 security guards were seeing a woman being taken out of a 12-story apartment block in the middle of New York, in Manhattan, on a busy city. And a craft pulls up. 3 beings come out, grey beings in fetal positions. They go into the building. They come out with Linda Cortile. And they go up into the craft, and the craft goes down into Brooklyn Bridge. All the cars came to a stop on Brooklyn Bridge that day and saw the ship. A lot of people thought there was a movie being made. People were seeing aliens walking on the streets in New York.
Wow.
Because I had a guy that wrote to me when I was doing the show Let's Talk Paranormal, and told me his name was Yancey Spence. And he said to me, I work at the post office just down the street from the United Nations. And there were guys that were also being abducted there that had got sand on their shoes. Their shoes were wet, they got sand on them, they didn't know how it had happened. And one guy who had a new pair of shoes that his wife has just bought him said, "My wife's going to kill me. I've got soaking wet shoes here with sand, and I don't know how I can explain it." And he said the beings were walking down the streets, and they could see the greys walking towards them. I thought, that's a really cool costume. And as the being got closer, realized, oh, that's no costume. You are what I see you are. So it's a very good question, and I don't know if anyone has the answer to that, but I totally see where you're coming from. But I think more people need to keep looking up. There was in Mexico, look at the flotillas they have in Mexico. I have video footage on my website, letstalkparanormal.com, of Jaime Maussan and Santiago talking about the goings-on in Mexico, and there's a flotilla of 500 UFOs. And there was hundreds of people that saw that. And they weren't balloons, because they were keeping a fixed position as they were moving across the sky. There seemed to be one central UFO, apparently, according to Jaime, that may have been controlling the whole lot. But there was 500, and they were keeping their exact distance as they were moving across the sky. And there were hundreds of people that saw that. So, and I think some countries are more open to it than others, too, So, they're here, whoever they are, and then they've come a long time.
The whole town, Phoenix, pretty much saw those.
Yeah, exactly. The Phoenix Lights, and one lady said that this craft was so huge, she took a newspaper out of the car, and she held it up to cover the craft and couldn't cover the craft. With the open newspaper, it was that large. So I think it's a question whether they want to be seen, and how many they want to show themselves to. I don't know. Maybe, our good friend here has an answer for that, or Barbara has an answer for it. I don't know.
Another question's over here.
So first of all, you have me thinking because I love owls. I'm a professional piano player, and I'm afraid of the dark. So maybe I should check into that.
Maybe. There might be something in that. Oh, boy.
I have two questions for you. One is it's actually related to the Phoenix Light ship, which is kind of the boomerang black ship that I see a lot in pictures. I'm wondering if you have any knowledge of who's piloting that ship, what species. And the second question was, if your boyfriend at the time got out of the meditation state and came to the room where you were, what do you think he would have seen?
Okay, so with the first question, I have no idea who was piloting that ship in Phoenix, Arizona. I have no idea at all. Now, you're talking about Phoenix, though?
Because there's pictures in Phoenix where the ship was a triangular, looking black
Right.
as well, which I thought was maybe the same one that you saw in England.
No. Well, I don't know, but mine wasn't as big as that craft in Phoenix. Mine was changing shape. I don't think this one in Phoenix was changing shape. And Lynn Katai, Dr. Lynn Katai, is an authority on the Phoenix Lights. She gives lectures often about those sightings in Phoenix. Mine was a smaller craft. Mine was maybe the size of a rooftop of a house. And mine was changing shape. Whether they were the same beings, greys, I don't know. I don't know who they were. The only communication, the only actual communication from a being I've had was that one in Studio City. But the boomerang shape object did say to me, have a real good look at me because what you're seeing is real, is what I got from that. But as for who was piloting it, I have no idea. I don't know. And you know, Bob Dean talks about, you know, when he used to work for SHAPE headquarters and NATO, that he got to see a top secret document many, many years ago, I think in the 60s, that there was something like 52 races coming here back then, that the governments were aware of, and one of which looked like we do. He said you could put a shirt and tie on them, you could put a suit on them, you could sit them in a restaurant, put them in a taxi cab, and you'd never know. He said, and these beings were walking down the corridors of the Pentagon, and they were freaking generals out. Generals did know who they were, but they were so human-looking, you'd really have to, look at them closely to realize that they weren't exactly human. And then, Dr. Frank Stranges, who was a guest on my show, who passed away, sadly, about 4 or 5 years ago, he talked about Val Thor coming from Venus. Yeah, and worked with the Pentagon for a while. This man had no fingerprints, and he had no navel, he said. And there's apparently actual photographs of Val Thor, which I have seen, if it is Val Thor. A friend of mine who's a casting director, Craig Campobasso, out here in California, is doing a movie based on Val Thor. So that will be interesting. So who knows? Who knows how many beings are coming here? Who knows? Anyone else? Yes, front row. And this gentleman with a hooded top on.
Well, I was just going to sort of answer his question, I guess, well, it's sort of like a combination of like all the questions, because you talked about Bob Dean, and Bob talked about being on the ships with beings that were just like us, and she was talking about the Pleiadians, and he was talking about, well, why do certain people see and other people don't, and all this stuff. And I guess I wanted to just give my perspective as, well, basically, it's like a combination of the genetics, it's a combination of who you are and your abilities. And the thing is that, well, ultimately, we are a resource. We are an energy source, and it can be used for good or for bad. And the thing is that most humans are kind of just viewed as sort of neutral. You know, they're kind of just not that important. You know, maybe you can use them to a degree, but they're not worth that much in terms of the extraterrestrials' perspective, and that's for the malevolent and the benevolent. But the different races, they have different agendas, and, you know, say maybe a race like the Pleiadians, well, they obviously have a totally different agenda than the Greys, and so if you're being abducted by the Greys versus being contacted by Pleiadians, and maybe both are occurring at the same time, and so I guess it's hard to answer a question like this. And the thing is, saying, well, why, you know, a ship can be there and, you know, one person sees or a couple people see, but then millions of people are oblivious to it. Well, it has a lot, like you said, it has a lot to do with the openness. You know, a lot of people can look at something and just edit it out because they don't want it to be real. It's too scary. And a lot of the time with regression or with people who have been through traumatic situations, people, when recounting events or details, like with police questioning, for example, people get the colors of cars wrong or all kinds of stuff like that, so our memory can be very distorted. And again, like it even goes back to like religious beliefs. Like a lot of people have strong belief systems which just are so strong that it literally edits the reality. And I guess I also wanted to mention people who are more open to using plants or psychedelics often communicate directly with beings in different dimensions. You know, Terence McKenna talks all the time about on DMT, you know, going into a different realm and talking with transforming machine elves is what he calls them or whatever. So there's all kinds of life out there, and people on this planet in general we're just so accustomed to seeing ourselves as human that we don't look at ourselves as alien at all. But the thing is that all humans, nothing on this planet comes from here, and you know, we all have extraterrestrial genetics, and so that's really, you know, this is an alien planet. This planet is a spaceship. We're in space. People just forget all this stuff.
That's right.
And when it comes to the question of alien life, you know, and whether it's real or not, it's kind of absurd. You know, we're not that smart, and if you look at our technology, if you look at, you know, our space program, what we're doing, you know, and how did we even come to be doing this in the last 100 years? You know, so I think people have just been totally conditioned into viewing reality in a certain way, and that is the control system which has been imposed on us by extraterrestrials themselves. So, you know, and then when you look at all the shape-shifting and how much memory can be manipulated and all this stuff, it's very, like you said, it does play with you, and it's hard to prove, and people are very skeptical, and they say, if you can't put it in my hand, then it's not real.
Right.
But, you know, just because you can't see something, I mean, look at electricity. There's all kinds of phenomena which are not easily observable, but can be proven. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with here, and that's my perspective.
Right, I think you've answered it very well. That's great. I agree, totally. It's very. Well, who's seen a UFO here? How many people? It's quite a few. Don't you get that thing of like, it's so magical when you see it? It's just got this whole magical thing about it. You can't describe it. It's so unreal and otherworldly, which it is. So.
Yeah, I guess I had a comment about looking at a craft, and I've had that happen with my husband one time where, I mean, the first one I saw when I was 16, I was with a girlfriend and we both saw it, but I was pointing one out to him through our little bathroom window that points towards the ocean, and it was right there in the window. I mean, lights were coming off, and he looked and he couldn't see it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and he's a recovering Catholic chemical engineer, you know, he's very, and an engineer, so it's kind of a bad combo. But, and then I was just going to mention, have you looked at Dr. Roger Lear's site, alienscalpel.com? There's the Turkish boomerang craft
that's
that you
amazing.
can see the little beings, and they look like gray maybe. Yeah. But I was going to ask you to tell your ghost story and wondered if you had any other ghost stories after that.
Ghost stories. Yeah. Well, mine, again, I was in London 1987. I had a friend that was, we were all musicians, all four of us were musicians, but one guy named Gary, who was, in particular was a hypnotherapist, he did this as a side interest. And he said to me and my best friend and another guy one Friday night, I'll show you what I do. I'll give you a demonstration on this hypnosis. So we went into one of the rooms at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. It was a huge practice room. There was no windows in there at all. And it had velvet curtains, long velvet curtains that hang from the ceiling to the floor to absorb the sound. There was a huge grand piano in there. There was also a harpsichord. There was a row of mirror along one wall for the singers to watch themselves singing and breathing and performing. And there was a row of chairs in front of the mirror. There was a row of chairs here where I sat with my best friend, and then a row of chairs along this wall. And Gary went with Howard in the middle of the room and was regressing him and putting him under and saying, you're sitting on a hillside, you're feeling very sleepy, you're feeling very tired, you're sitting under a tree, and regresses him back to a young boy. So as he's doing this, something catches my attention by the mirror. And you know when you do that double take, when you look at something and you look at, I did that double take. And what was sitting on a chair in front of that mirror was a female that was dressed in modern day clothing, and she had a white skirt. I'm trying to think what she had, a white skirt, a black top I think it was, and a white belt, and black high heel shoes. She got her legs crossed, beautiful legs we women would die for, gorgeous looking slender legs. And she just got her hands clasped around her knee, and she was just watching Gary and Howard and what they were doing. The only thing was, from her shoulders upwards, there was no head. And there was no reflection in the mirror. So she appeared to be solid, but there was moments when you looked at her that you could see right through her. So she wasn't totally solid. And it was, my heart was just pounding out my chest because I'd never seen anything like that in my life. That's the first time I've ever actually witnessed a spirit in a physical form. And I'm told that it's very, not painful, but difficult for spirit to come through and show themselves like that in their full form as they were on Earth when they were here. It's difficult for them to do that. I think full moon has some effect for that to happen. So I'm told with psychics that I've spoken to and spiritualist mediums. It's an easier way to gather energy to make a full body form. But no, she was definitely there. And we heard the caretaker coming round about 9 o'clock to lock up. And so we thought, well, we got to stop what we're doing here. And we got outside, and of course, being students at the time, the next stop for us was the pub. So we went to the pub, and my best friend was the first one to say to me, did anybody see anything in there? And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we said, a woman by the mirror at the same time. So he'd seen it too, but didn't want to, interrupt what was going on. So very real, but she was modern day. She wasn't from an era, and a lot of sightings in London are from various eras, like Jack the Ripper era, things like that, ancient, centuries. And no, she was modern day. So she was either a student or a professor from the way she was dressed, but why she didn't show her head, I have no idea. It's odd.
Okay. August the 21st of 2013, my husband and I had just come home from an evening out. We live in Burbank. He was parking the car in the garage. I had gotten out of the car and I was headed up towards the front door to unlock the house. We have a courtyard with a fountain. Something caught my eye. I looked up, and over the garage came this object. It was a silver, brilliant white ball of light. And it moved slowly across the sky until it got right over the fountain area, And it was like it stopped for just an instant, and it seemed to turn slightly, and I could see red fire coming out of the one side of it. And then it started to move again, and this long white tail came out of the back of it. I don't know if it was vapor, what it was, but in just an instant, I'm screaming for him. And I keep telling him, it's so large, you've got to come see this thing. He runs down the driveway into the street to look and see if he can see this thing, and he can't. By the time he gets back up to where I am, it disappeared just like that, gone.
Wow. Is that the first thing you've ever seen?
Yes.
It is?
Well,
you
of
remember?
that type of, yes, of an alien craft type thing, yes. I've seen other things. I saw oh my God, it was a monstrous thing when I lived in Glendora. I woke up one night and this thing was standing in our bedroom, holding onto the door jamb, staring at me. And the skin was just pulled over bone, literally. Its eyes were dark. You couldn't see a white to the eye at all. And it had long, stringy hair, bony fingers. And I tried to wake up my late husband, and you could not wake him up. He was just out.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept staring at this thing, not knowing what it was or what it was going to do. And pretty soon it disappeared around the corner into our den. And I was able to get out of bed. I turned on the light in the bedroom, and I ventured into the den. Nothing. I went through that whole house. My sons were asleep. I locked every window in that house. I turned on every light in that house. Couldn't see it. The next day, we came home from a meeting that we were at, my husband and I. We came through the front door, and he pushed me back, and he's screaming, "Who are you? Who are you?" He's running down the hallway to our bedroom. And he comes back, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I saw it." He said, "It went into our bedroom. I chased it into the bedroom, and it disappeared."
Wow.
Yeah.
Very interesting. How long, when you saw the creature, how long did you see it for?
Oh, God. It seemed like a long time, but probably it was maybe 3 minutes at the most. But it seemed like forever.
Right.
I mean, this thing was it's human size. It wasn't small, it was human size. But I'll never forget the eyes, the hair, the hands, and it looked like something that came out of a grave with the skin stretched over bone.
Mm-hmm.
It was scarier than heck.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people that have said that they look like zombies. Yeah. They're very zombie-like. Yeah. That's fascinating.
But I don't know what it was. To this day, I don't know what either of those things were that I saw.
It might be a good thing to speak with Yvonne about it, or Barbara. Do you think you have any missing time?
I don't know. Did we have missing time that night?
No, not that night.
Not that night, no.
What was the general feeling of the neighborhood when you saw the object? Was it still?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
No traffic, no animals?
Not a dog barking.
Okay.
Not a sound anywhere. Oh, sorry. There was no sound at all. It was just completely quiet in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in a quiet neighborhood.
Right.
So, no, there was no sound. But with that creature thing, I mean, that was scary.
So was it like a gray with hair?
Like a reptilian?
There was not a reptilian, no. It had long, stringy hair, and the hair was the color almost of the skin that was stretched over this skeleton. It was like dried skin. If you've ever seen a corpse, dried skin, stretched.
Like a zombie, yeah.
Oh gosh, it was frightening.
Mm-hmm. And obviously you didn't want to communicate with it.
Oh no, no.
No.
Mm-mm.
Oh boy.
No.
This world is fascinating, isn't it? Whatever we're interacting with, we're certainly interacting with something. And yeah, I'm lost for words, really. It's an amazing. When you see something, it changes your life. I mean, being a skeptic is healthy, I think, to some degree. It's when you're a debunker, I think, that makes it. You know, I can't accept debunking, but being a skeptic is healthy. But it sure changes your life when you see something. You wish everybody could see something because you want to really try and get somebody to understand what it is you're seeing. Family members seen things, or?
No, just me.
Just you?
Just me. Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, just me. Yeah, I saw something in a house in Upland that we lived in. We came home one night, and our youngest son was still living at home. And as we turned up the street, we saw him standing in the window, his shadow. And we lived in a 2-story house. And I said, "Oh, good, our son's home." And we pull up, and his car's not there. And I thought, well, that's really odd. Why would he be home and his car's not in the driveway? When we went, my husband, again, wouldn't let me go in the house. He thought there was, somebody that was in the house. So he goes throughout the whole house looking for our son, and he's not in the house. And not more than a week later, he had an accident and broke his neck. So we don't know if it was an omen. We have no idea who that person was that was standing in his window in his bedroom.
Wow.
So.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
I just had one experience where I was living at a friend's house in Illinois, and his father had died a couple years prior in a car accident. And I was the only one in the house at the time, and I was just going to take a shower. And I was in the shower, and I just got this cold chill down my spine, and I just had to turn off the shower. I kind of freaked out for like no reason, really. And as soon as I turned off the shower, I realized that the water in the sink was running at full blast. And like maybe it was just like I just picked up on something had happened, and literally I opened up the shower curtain, and there was this it was hot. I was taking a hot shower, and the mirror was all fogged up, but there was this, it was like somebody had taken their finger and gone down the mirror. And yeah, I don't know. I just thought I would share that.
Yeah, it's there's a case in my book, Welcome to Haunted Las Vegas, Nevada, where a couple in Las Vegas have had experiences continuously in the bathroom like that, where spirit would write messages on the mirror. Yeah, and they said that when they felt the where the finger had done the letters, it felt like a chalk almost.
Well, it's like cold, yeah, and it like exactly like
yeah.
nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, and they'd written the words "beware." Beware. Then another time they'd written "I see you," and then they had a joke with them, and they wrote the word "boo" on it.
Probably were just getting a real kick out of it.
Yeah, and it was,
For real.
But the team went in and they, they cleansed the home. The spirit, actually it was someone who lived in Howard Hughes' home. And the team went in, the Las Vegas Society of Paranormal Investigations, they went in and they cleansed the home, but the spirit was so intense that they had to go back a second time to cleanse it, to get rid of it, because it was still writing on the mirrors. Yeah.
I'm curious if the writing was mirrored, or, like, was it so they could read it, or was it like as if someone was in the mirror and wrote it?
No, so they could see it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they could see it. Yeah, and they did everything to try and capture this and couldn't capture it.
Yeah. Creepy.
Yeah, it was, several different occasions they would do this, and it would freak them out. Cases of hanging Barbie dolls hanging up by their hair from the ceiling. Kids' Barbie dolls, Yeah, it was some amazing cases in there.
Hey, everybody. I grew up in a small town in Riverside County. It's called Anza. And my father went through a divorce in the house, and he was unhappy being in the house. So he decided to build a little cabin up on the hill. He had a big piece of property. So when we were 12 years old, we moved with my dad into the house, and he put on a spare bedroom, but the house never had a bathroom. So from the age of 12 years old to 15 years old, every night, you know, you got to take how many pees you got to take a night? You know, every night I'm going outside, and the stars are just amazing in where I live because you can just see everything compared to in the city. Like there, in the city you see 3 stars, but down out there you see everything. So every night, not every night, but I can't tell you how many times in my life that there was a mountain towards the west. It's called Kuya Mountain, and there's a lot of crystals and stuff in there, and who knows. But anyways, we'd go out to take a pee, and either me or my brother or my dad or whoever, multiple times, I can't count, just would see lights, and they would just pew, and stop, and pew. There'd be 5 of them. Pew. They're just going in, you know, and it's like, Dad, Mark, come, hey, they're here, you know, and they'd come running out, and yeah, you know, we'd all confirm it, and well, they're here again, you know, and no up close. I'm glad I never saw the gray guys or anything like that, but I just have seen many, many lights my whole life, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. So,
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I guess they were doing the right angle turns. Yeah. Yeah.
there's like no way it could be a helicopter.
Right. Actually, there's some space footage I had seen. It's a well-known piece of space footage now, actually, where you can see the Earth in the right-hand side of the shot, and then you see 2 UFOs coming in at an angle, and then they flip up like that at a right angle turn. It's an amazing piece of, I think, STS something, NASA footage. I think that might be on my website as well. But yeah, it's crazy. It's like I interviewed somebody we didn't actually do a show about Mothman, but we were getting ready to do a show about Mothman, and I had spoken to, you're aware of Mothman, right? Yeah. I had spoken to a couple of people in California about the show, and they said, the husband said to me, oh, we had a really strange encounter on our way from Las Vegas, coming back to California one night, and it was like 2 a.m. in the morning, and they said, we were coming from Vegas, there was himself and a friend, and the friend's girlfriend at the time that was asleep in the back of the truck. And we said, we're coming down the road from Vegas. You know where the, I think it's Bakersfield, where the big thermometer is? Yeah? Baker. Yeah. Coming down there, heading towards the thermometer. He said, and we see this huge dark shadow in the sky coming towards us, but we see these wings, they're huge wings. And the wings are flapping. He said, and the wings, as it got closer, we could see from the wingspan must have been about a 30-foot wingspan. But in the middle of these wings was a human form. And it came over the truck, and he said, if we'd have had the windows down and reached out, we could have grabbed the foot of this thing. And it had a human-looking foot that had like bear claws for nails coming out of the foot of this thing, and it flew over the truck. And I just thought it was a real interesting story, but I begged him to come on the show and he wouldn't talk about it. He said, no, I don't mind telling you. He said, call my friend and ask my friend and, you know, see if my friend will come on the show and talk about it. And I did call him, and he never returned my call. So this thing just scared the hell out of them. So it seems that, you know, Mothman, whatever it is alive and well out in Las Vegas somewhere. And we have some very unusual caves out there in Las Vegas. You know, very, very odd shaped looking things. I mean, God knows what's out there. Or even what this thing was looking for at 2 a.m. in the morning.
The energy in Las Vegas is terrible. I used to live there. I would never, I have an aversion to that place. I really do.
Some people like it, some people don't. You know, you either love it or hate it. You know, it's world-class everything, world-class entertainment, restaurants.
Well, I played poker professionally, and it was convenient, and it was a good
Yeah.
deal there, but I just don't like the
Right. Yeah, no, I see what you mean. But I do want to, is there any more questions?
Last one, guys. Just while we're sharing paranormal stuff, I want to share a quick ghost story that happened to me that's really freaky.
Yeah.
I woke up.
Is it for the mic?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Is it for recording? Okay. So this ghost story that happened to me, I got woken up at 3 in the morning. I don't know why. You know when your vision is still hazy from waking up? That's probably when you see most things. And I remember watching my door, and and I'm seeing this thing, and it's there's a silhouette of a man with a hat right in front of me, and there was a towel behind, but I could see through him, almost like in Predator when it's clear. Yeah. And I could see this shape, and I'm just staring at him. I'm slowly waking up to this when it's staring back at me. And we have this sort of stare off when all of a sudden it starts walking towards me and puts his hand on the bed as my sheets form to the shape of his hand, and he comes, and I just scream. I just turn on everything. I'm like, ah! Turn on the lights, this thing disappeared, and it was just so freaky.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, how long ago was that?
Probably 9 years ago.
And you haven't seen anything since?
I've seen a lot of things. Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was just the craziest one.
Yeah. I find with the research I did for that book that a lot of spirit try and communicate with you through telephones.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Technology.
Or technology, computers, and yeah. They do. I spoke with one guy who said his deceased brother tried to connect with him through a telephone call one day. And he knew it was him because he knows the sound of his brother's voice. And he said he just said 3 words to me, and it was, Nick, it's okay. And that was it. He says, and he tried to dial back the number where the person, his brother had called from to try and get back to his brother, but couldn't get through. So there's a lot of telephone communication, for sure, that goes on. And, the White Noise movie, I interviewed Michael Keaton at the Hollywood, where was it? It wasn't I think it was the Beverly Wilshire. I interviewed him some time ago when the movie came out, and I wanted to get his opinion. He was done a paranormal movie, with communication from the other side. What do you think about that? Are you, do you believe in it? And he didn't believe in it. He said, I'm on the fence with it. But I grew up in a family that did see things. And he says, and my sister loves this stuff. She loves it. He says, but I'm on the fence. And I said, well, tell me something. Have you ever seen a UFO? And I kind of caught him off guard a little bit. And he sat there and he said, he thought about it and he said, no, I never have. And I said, are you sure? He says, no. But the producer of White Noise, Paul Brooks, that sat next to him, said, I have. I've seen a UFO. I saw it in Turkey, silver disc. And everybody was out by the pool, and we were looking up, and people saw it, and they were pointing, look at that, and everybody was looking up. He said, so yeah, I saw it for sure. But he did the movie just because he thought it was an interesting concept, not because he was a believer of the other side, but said, I'm on the fence with it. So, it was pretty interesting. But one last thing I wanted to talk about was I had hosted a conference in Texas. A good friend of mine named Paula Harris, who runs Starworks USA, who's putting on the Laughlin Conference this November. And she invited me out to host a conference and to speak about my book a couple of years ago in Texas, in Glen Rose. And I'd done my lecture and talking about the book and the implants, and I had a few people that came up to me afterwards. And this young lady came up to me and she said, I have one of those implants that you're talking about. And I said, oh, you do? She said, yeah, I do. I said, well, what makes you think you have one? She goes, well, I have it on an X-ray. And I said, oh. Well, when she said she had it on X-ray, my eyes lit up because she has it on an X-ray. So I said, well, can you send me the X-ray? And she said, yeah, sure. I'll email it to you. I said, well, tell me the story of what happened. So she said to me, she had gone for a mammogram, and it was just a regular mammogram, and they'd found something very unusual and didn't tell her what it was. So they sent her to a specialist in New York. She lived in New York and she lived in Texas, so she frequented from New York and Texas. And she goes to get this mammogram. Something's odd on there. They send her to a specialist in New York, so she goes off to New York. So they do a whole multiple of testing on her. The doctor comes in and says to her, when you're dressed, come and see me, because I want to talk to you about something. So she gets dressed, she goes into his office, and he says, tell me something. Have you ever been shot? She says, no. He says, are you sure? She says, yes, I'm positive. He says, well, even something like buck riding. She says, I'm absolutely positive I've never been shot. Why are you asking me this? He says, well, you have a triangle piece of metal in your left breast, and it shouldn't be there. And there's no entry as to how this thing got in there either. Then he turns to her and he says to her, you're not one of these alien abductees, are you? She says, well, quite frankly, yes, I am. Yeah, quite frankly, I am. So she said to me, what do I do? What do I do? I said, don't remove it. They get pissed off when you remove them. They don't like it. Yes, they don't like it. They're not aggressive, in a human form like we can take on aggression. But I was speaking to Alice Levy about this, who has an implant that Dr. Roger Lear removed, and she said to me, they have this demeanor about them that you just know that you should not have removed it. And she, in fact, was re-abducted and they re-implanted. And they said, this one you will not remove. And this one was way in her ear, I think she said.
So doesn't Dr. Lear says to remove them though, or he just says to
He leaves it up to the person how they feel it. He doesn't, make them take it out. He leaves it totally up to them, however they feel. I go along with a lot of people. If it's not causing any harm, leave well alone. But I said to her, let me see if I can find... I didn't... See, Bud Hopkins had passed away at the time. Otherwise, I would have referred her to Bud to get some regression to find out how this thing had got in there, or who put it in there, and why. But he'd passed away, so I put her in touch with someone in Texas that I knew. And I've reached out to her a couple of times, but she hasn't responded back. And I know it was something she didn't really want to talk about. But I found that fascinating, and then the week later, she noticed that the doctor's office had gone out of business. Well, yeah, he mentioned, do you think you're an alien abductee? Some way, somehow, this got back and out of business. Yeah, the Dina I speak about in my book had an implant that she had taken out of her body. And the doctor, she says, I watched the woman behind the desk label it on the vial. She put my name, she put the date. I watched her do it. When I called back a week or so later to find out what the results were, what implant? What implant are you talking about? Who are you? You have my name, you know my name, this is the date I came in. And she said, and what was weird, I was never sent a copay in the mail. So, these things happen. It's a bizarre phenomena. But I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was really interesting that a doctor would even come out and say, do you think you're an alien abductee? Thanks, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracie. I got a couple of announcements here. CIRO's next meeting is July 12th, and it's Ruben Uriarte, that's how you pronounce his name, and Noah Torres, and it's about the Cisco Grove UFO encounter that happened 50 years ago. And this will be at Culver City Veterans Memorial Complex at 7 o'clock, and we have cards out there. Our next meeting is August 3rd, right here with Preston Dennett, and it's actually a very timely topic. He's going to go over the undersea bases off the coast, which a very large structure has been found off of Malibu that we're going to discuss. So that's it for tonight. Thank you again, Tracie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara and Yvonne, for being here, and everyone. And happy Father's Day to everybody. anyone wants to go to the group, meet up at Denny's. People in this break. Oh, okay. Thank you. That was great. So if you're